So Tulsi Gabbard is officially not going to be in the next debates. And the way she was left out is incredibly questionable, to say the least. So she, according to the rules that have been laid out, she qualified. She qualified if you allow all the serious polls to count. But they don't allow all the serious polls to count. They arbitrarily discount certain ones and say they don't count. They don't matter. Why? Why? We don't know. The DNC has not specifically stated, hey, here's why we're leaving out this poll or that poll. The methodology could be sound. The company could be totally legit and respected. They still leave out many polls that should be allowed in the conversation. So it's incredibly weaselly and incredibly gross how they're leaving her out of the debate. And this is similar to what they did with Mike Gravel, how they switched it up at the last minute. So to be clear, Tulsi has hit the donor number and she has hit the polling number, but she hasn't hit the polling number according to their DNC-approved polls. Really sketchy. So, in Real Clear Politics here, Michael Tracy lays out the case and gives you all the specifics. He says the following. Gabbard has polled at 2% or more in 2 polls sponsored by the largest newspapers in 2 early primary states. But the DNC, through its mysteriously incoherent selection process, has determined that these surveys do not count toward her debate eligibility. Without these exclusions, Gabbard would have already qualified. She has polled at 2% or more in 2 polls officially deemed qualifying and surpassed the 130,000 donor threshold on August 2nd. While the latter metric would seem more indicative of grassroots support, a formerly obscure Hawaii congresswoman has managed to secure more than 160,000 individual contributions from all 50 states, according to the latest figures from her campaign. The DNC has declared that it will prioritize polling over donors. In polls with a sample size of just a few hundred people, this means excluding candidates based on what can literally amount to rounding errors. A poll that places a candidate at 1.4% could be considered non-qualifying, but a poll that places a candidate at 1.5% is considered qualifying. Pinning such massive decisions for the trajectory of a campaign on insignificant fractional differences seems wildly arbitrary. Take also Gabbard's performance in polls conducted by YouGov. One such poll, published July 21st, sponsored by CBS, placed Gabbard at 2% in New Hampshire and therefore counts towards her qualifying total. But Gabbard has polled at 2% or more in 5 additional YouGov polls, except those polls are sponsored by The Economist, not CBS. Needless to say, The Economist is not a, quote, sponsoring organization per the whims of the DNC. It may be one of the most vaunted news organizations in the world, and YouGov may be a qualified polling firm in other contexts, but the DNC has chosen to exclude The Economist results for reasons that appear less and less defensible. So he also goes on to make another good point where he says, the candidates are campaigning specifically in a limited number of states at the moment, namely Iowa and New Hampshire, the top 2 on the list that they're campaigning at for obvious reasons, because that's where the early voting occurs. So the fact that she's spending all of her time there and she's campaigning there and she has the necessary support to get into the next debate there, but that doesn't count because only the national polls count, or some polls in the early states count, but you got to go back more than 6 weeks ago in order to find one that counts. And even according, if you just use the national poll standard, she qualifies if you use all the polls, but they don't use all the polls. They cherry pick and say, oh, this one's DNC approved, this one's not DNC approved. And oh, would you look at that? It turns out Tulsi Gabbard's not allowed on the debate stage. Sorry. You didn't make it. You didn't make it according to the rules. Yeah, but what if the rules are dumb? Why are you not counting certain polls which should obviously count, whether it's polls specifically in New Hampshire or elsewhere in early states, or whether it's national polls that you just dismiss? Come on, man, it makes no sense. Even if you're somebody who doesn't like Tulsi Gabbard, you can admit this makes absolutely no sense, and this shouldn't be the case. The idea, like some of the candidates who made the debate stage, I don't have the list in front of me, but there is zero doubt that a lot of the candidates who made it don't have the same grassroots support that she does. We also know, for the record, and you guys know this because I reported on it previously, she was the most Googled candidate after both of her debates. Most Googled candidate. And she's also one of the highest in terms of Twitter followers gained. Which does, that does show you that there's plenty of grassroots support. She has a very loyal following online. And that does count for something. That does mean something. It's not like you could totally write them off. I know that in mainstream media, all they do is shit on her 24/7, but that's irrelevant. Those are overpaid hacks. And they ask her the same question over and over and over, and it's equally stupid every time. So to leave her out seems incredibly arbitrary, incredibly silly. There are some candidates who made the debate stage who are just, they don't have anywhere near the support that she has. So this is kind of a hack job here. In the same way that they excluded Gravel by switching up the rules at the last second and prioritizing one thing over another thing, that's kind of what they're doing with Tulsi here. And bottom line is, I'm not against the idea of using polling, to try to determine who's allowed on the stage, and then you do have to narrow the field as you go. I'm not against that. But if you're going to do that, just accept all reputable polling. That's not very hard standard, right? Like, just accept all reputable polling. That's it. But no, they've like in a very narrow way, and they don't give you the specifics as to why they pick these polls, but they only pick certain polls. This one's DNC approved, this one's not. Really? What's your criteria for determining that? So that's not good, man. This is not good, and it's messed up. And even if you don't like Tulsi Gabbard, you have to fight for what's right, because this is unacceptable.